And we are back live on YouTube for a Patriots Q A. We'll give you a couple minutes to get in here as we go along. Feel free to drop your questions, as always, in the live chat. We'll answer them as they come along. We'll start with Twitter. Evan, I know you got a question here about the tight end situation and whether or not you think that it's a disadvantage for these rookie tight ends that they don't have a solid veteran to learn from. Matt Lacoste, you know, he is what he is. He's not Gronk. He's not what the Patriots are used to at that position. Is that a disadvantage for these rookies?
Well, I think in one hand, you could say that this is a difficult position to learn for the Patriots offense, and see guys like Aaron Hernandez, Rob Gronkowski, when they came through here, that rookie season, they had kind of specialized roles and they weren't playing, primary roles, starting roles, whatever you want to call it. So they did ease those guys into it. So maybe Asiasi and Keene won't have that same luxury. But I also think that looking at what that position was last year, they got to find a way to improve that spot, and going out and signing one of these veterans like a Delaney Walker or someone like that off the street, I'm just not sure that's going to move the needle all that much for this Patriots offense. So I personally would rather see the rookies play, even if it is a simplified route tree or a simplified role that they're kind of making so that the rookies feel more comfortable. I think that they have much higher upside than anything that they're going to get on the free agent market or trade market currently. So let's see what they have.
Another question coming here on Twitter. Do you think there's a chance that J.J. Taylor makes the team either on the 53-man or practice squad? Yesterday, we did a video on who we think is the most likely UDFA to make the opening day roster. We know the Patriots have that active 16-year-long streak, so one of them looking to keep that alive. You can check out that video on our website at clnsmedia.com. But to get back to this question, do you think J.J. Taylor has a good shot?
I think J.J. Taylor has the skill to make an NFL team, and I would assume that he's going to have a decent preseason, and then he'll go out and sign a contract if he is released by the Patriots with another team. But the problem that I see for him is just the depth that the Patriots have at that position. They've been pretty healthy there. Rex Burkhead's had his injury issues, but Sony Michel and James White have, for the most part, been very healthy, especially last year. So they don't really have a ton of need for depth running backs, and Damian Harris can't even get on the field as a third-round pick at that spot with Bolden and Burkhead and White and Michelle ahead of him. So I think it's a long shot for J.J. Taylor to make the roster just because of the depth chart at that position being so stacked. But I think he will be on an NFL roster somewhere.
You're going to love this question coming in on our live chat. Not 2020 specific, but Evan, who do you think is the best Patriots wide receiver of all time?
The best Patriots wide receiver of all time. Well, I'm not old enough to see Stanley Morgan play, but I know that all the old-time Patriots fans would kill me if I didn't at least mention Stanley Morgan. So he is definitely up there in the running. Wes Welker, I would say, was probably the most productive or prolific wide receiver the Patriots have ever had, just in the stat sheet. But the most talented receiver to ever wear a Patriots uniform is Randy Moss, and I don't think that that's much of an argument there. So most decorated Patriot, greatest Patriot, maybe it is somebody like a Stanley Morgan or like a Troy Brown or a Wes Welker, but Randy Moss is definitely the most talented receiver to ever wear the uniform.
Got another question here on Twitter. Do you think trading for another tight end makes sense? We talked a little bit in our first question here. Do you think that room is set with what they have right now?
I do, because I think that they have high expectations for Asiasi, especially as a rookie, to really come in here and make an immediate impact on this team. So to go out there and spend, after you spend 2 third-round picks and 2 trade-ups in the third round on the tight end position, to then go ahead and trade another draft pick or another player of value for another tight end, it just seems like a lot of investment in that one position. And, that was something that I learned from Bill Belichick's thinking about the wide receiver group. Is last year we spent a first-round pick on N'Keal Harry, then we traded a second-round pick for Mohamed Sanu, and the team kind of looks at it like the whole investment that they're giving into that position. And I just don't see them, after spending back-to-back third-rounders on the tight end position, going out and then wasting another pick on a tight end.
And you cover the Patriots when a lot of your questions on Twitter and the live chat are around undrafted free agents, because Patriots fans want to hear about them, want to learn about them, because there's a really good likelihood that one or two or a handful of them could make an impact. Julian in our live chat here, Will Hastings or Jeff Thomas between those two UDFA wide receivers?
The Will Hastings buzz is kind of taking me by surprise, honestly. All of a sudden, he's kind of like the dark horse, sneaky favorite, like the popular pick to make this team because of his relationship with Jared Stidham, because of his role in the slot. Listen, I like Will Hastings' game, but I do have my concerns about him getting back to where he was in 2018 with Jared Stidham. He tore his ACL the year after that. He never really got back up to that, level of kind of, effort or competition or whatever you want to call it. And Jeff Thomas, to me, is more of a wild card type of pick, but just because of his off-field concerns and his character concerns. So I would say that Hastings probably has a better chance to make the team, just because I assume that he'll be around longer than Jeff Thomas, whereas Jeff Thomas, I think, could be off this team quickly if things go awry.
Like I said, feel free to drop your questions in the live chat. We'll answer them as we go along here. Which veteran tight end makes the team? Matt Lacoste or Ryan Izzo?
I think this is the end for Ryan Izzo. I feel bad saying that because he's a really nice guy, but he came in here as primarily a blocking tight end, and he really gets pushed around by NFL power and NFL linebackers and defensive ends. He's just not able to move those guys the way that I think the Patriots would hope for or are expecting based off of his Florida State tape. So unless he makes big strides in year 3 now for him in the weight room, specifically packing in some strength on his frame, I just don't think I see the NFL kind of athletic profile from Ryan Izzo. Whereas with Matt Lacoste, as underwhelming as he was at times last year, he was at least a serviceable player, I would say, at that spot at times in kind of flashes, especially as a pass catcher. So I think Lacoste ends up making this team as the veteran, but I really do think that Asiasi and Keene are going to see the lion's share of the snaps.
Another question about an undrafted free agent quarterback this time, Jamar Smith. Evan, I know you like him and his potential.
Yeah.
The question's about whether or not he can make an impact this preseason.
Yeah, listen, I think Jamar Smith is a very talented quarterback and a guy that probably should have gotten drafted, but because of his suspension in 2019, which was only 2 games, but it was enough at that position to, cause some problems for him in the pre-draft process, and being a Louisiana Tech quarterback and not a quarterback from a bigger school, it just knocked him out of the draft a little bit. But when you look at arm talent, athleticism, kind of feel for the game, ability to move around in the pocket, he's got a lot of different skills that are very, very, intriguing, I would say, as a quarterback, kind of developmental quarterback option as that third guy on the roster, whether it's the practice squad or the 53. So I really do think that they have the ability to keep a third quarterback, and Jamar Smith would be my dark horse favorite right now.
And obviously they also signed Brian Lewerke as an undrafted quarterback. Why do you give Smith the edge over him?
Well, Lewerke, Sierra, quite frankly, stunk the last 2 years at Michigan State, and he's got interceptions all over his tape that are a big concern. His footwork in the pocket and the skittishness that he shows behind his line was also a big concern. There's just a lot of things there with his tape that just don't scream Patriots to me. Ball security, pocket poise and presence, accuracy to all 3 levels is kind of spotty at times. So I think that Jamar Smith has got a lot more talent than Brian Lewerke.
We got a question here in the live chat. Do you buy the take that the Patriots offense would look more like Mike Shanahan's offense?
I think he means Kyle Shanahan. Now, Mike Shanahan, his father, does have an influence on Kyle Shanahan's offense, but really, no offense to Mike Shanahan, but Kyle Shanahan's kind of taken it and ran with it from there and evolved it from that point. And I do buy some of that influence. I think what you're going to see out of their fullback position, whether it's Dan Vitale or it's Dalton Keene, is going to be some of that Kyle Juszczyk, George Kittle type of stuff, where they are using them a little bit more off the line of scrimmage. They are trying to get them into the flats, into space with the ball in their hands so they can create after the catch and do those sort of things and get more of that H-back role back into this offense. I do think we're going there. I do think that there could be some sort of a wide zone, outside zone element with the bootleg off of that, like you see in Kyle Shanahan's offense. And one thing with Jared Stidham that we've talked about is that he is a little bit more athletic than Tom Brady, and he can run around a little bit more than Tom Brady could. So moving the pocket with bootleg concepts, with rollouts, is a little bit more realistic, and that's what you see with the 49ers.
Another question here about Marqise Lee, who's obviously one of the wide receivers the Patriots signed in free agency, whether or not he's healthy, because we know the last 2 seasons he's barely seen the field due to 2 different kind of serious issues health-wise. And if he is healthy, Evan, do you think he makes the roster?
He is healthy and he's ready to go for whenever the time is to go for these guys. And, finally is healthy. I think the biggest issue for Marqise Lee is just looking at the depth chart, that spot. The Patriots have so many inside receivers. I mean, Julian Edelman, Mohamed Sanu, Jacoby Myers, not to mention the undrafted guys that they've brought in. So there's just a ton of bodies at that spot. And I also think that N'Keal Harry might play some more snaps inside as well in his second year. So it's just a lot of guys to jump over for Marqise Lee. Now, I do think that he has the chance to make the team because he does have sort of a professional route tree, strong hands at the catch point, ability to create separation with body positioning and understanding of leverage and route running and things like that. So he has that Patriots kind of makeup. But at the same time, I think it's going to be a little bit of a struggle for him to really see the field over the guys that I mentioned that they're just loaded at that inside spot. It's going to take an injury or an unforeseen circumstance, I think, for Marqise Lee to make it.
We have a question about Kyle Duggar and the Patriots' decision to
I see you skipping over Maury, by the way.
Well, we talked about Jamar Smith and whether or not you gave him the edge over Brian Lewerke. So I feel like we've run our course there with Jamar Smith. But going to Duggar, why the Patriots use their first pick, given their strength in the secondary and at cornerback and safety?
Well, this is something that, I wrote about today, actually, in my defensive line piece, was just about how the Patriots really invest money and draft capital in the secondary, and they kind of look the other way with the defensive linemen. Right now, they're 28th in spending on the defensive line, and they're near the top of the league in spending in the secondary, obviously. And they also have, back-to-back second-round picks as secondary players. What I'm getting at is that the statistics and the analytics kind of show us that coverage is more important than pass rush. Having a dominant secondary is going to win you more football games than having a dominant pass rush will. So the Patriots are building their defense, as Bill Belichick always does, from the back on in. And the other thing that Bill Belichick always does is he drafts players not for just the 2020 season, but also looking beyond the 2020 season. Kyle Duggar is going to be on this team for at least 4 years. So what's his role going to look like in year 3 or 4 once Devin McCourty and Patrick Chung kind of hang it up? That might be a little bit different. Devin McCourty's 32, Patrick Chung is 32, about to be 33. Terrence Brooks isn't going to be here forever. Adrian Phillips isn't going to be here forever. So Kyle Duggar is going to have his opportunity here not before long.
We'll go to Maury's second question here because I do think it's a good one. Patrick Chung was thought to be a potential surprise cut, and then he got that contract extension, kind of squashing any of those rumors. Is there any other veteran on this roster that you think could be a potential surprise cut?
Ooh, that's a good question. He's put me on the spot with that one. I would say
tossed around.
Yeah, I would say that it's kind of a competition for me between Rex Burkhead to see if he can actually continue to hold off Damian Harris and really make himself a valuable asset to this team. And then also I would go at the safety position and look at Terrence Brooks. Now, maybe he's not the sexy veteran name that, everybody wants that surprise cut to be, but you look at the addition of Adrian Phillips, the draft pick of Kyle Duggar, and there's just a lot of redundant bodies at that position, at that strong safety box kind of hybrid role. So I wouldn't be surprised if one of those guys is on the outside looking in, and it's definitely not going to be Duggar. So it's going to be either Phillips or Brooks.
Another question here about the offensive line. Really deep group. How many do you think make the roster? And do you see any of the 3 drafted this year having a chance?
The Patriots typically like to keep about 8 offensive linemen. You got your 5 starters, you got 3 backups, and that's sort of what you go around with. But I would say that the guys that were drafted this year definitely have a very good chance of making the team. And the main one I would say is Michael Onwenu, the big boy from Michigan. He's got a great chance to make the team. I thought that they'd stole him in the 6th round, and he should have been a little bit of a higher draft pick, but I think his weight concerns just dropped him a little bit down the board. So once he gets in here, I think Patriots fans are going to see that guy can really move for a guy of his size, and he's going to throw a lot of big blocks on the tape. So I would say Onwenu's got a really good chance. Dustin Woodard, to me, has a really good chance too, because they don't really have a viable backup center right now. Ted Karras is gone, and they don't really have a guy like Karras who has center and guard experience in the NFL. So I wouldn't be surprised if Dustin Woodard sticks around as sort of that waiting in the wings developmental prospect for David Andrews.
We have a question here about Dalton Keene. And first of all, the question says, is he good enough to make the 53-man? And I think that's a lock.
Yeah, that's a lock.
Everything you've talked about. They're running with Ossie and Keene. So I'm going to flip this a little bit. What do you expect from him in terms of production in his rookie season?
Well, I think it really depends on what his role is and how much they kind of reinvent his role to fit what his skill set is. And I think he has the chance to be a very productive receiver. But the question is how exactly are they getting him the football? If they're going to train him to be a primary tight end, just a typical Y, who's going to run a regular route tree, seams, crossers, posts, that kind of stuff, little curl routes, that's going to be take a little bit more time for him to develop into that role. But if they just lean into his skill set and they use him in that fullback H-back crossover type of position, then maybe he can have a bigger impact as a rookie. Ossie is really the guy that I'm looking for as that immediate impact player, because I think it's going to take Keene some time to learn the offense and learn his responsibilities.
This next question brings up a conversation we've had over and over again, and we talked about it again yesterday in a video. Do you think there's a need to simplify the Patriots offense, and how could they do it?
No, I think that it's the opposite. We've talked about this a lot, and I think it's one of the most overblown narratives that people spew out there about the Patriots. Quite frankly, bad teams that don't want to work at it and don't want to learn offenses, more kind of complex offenses, stink. That's what bad teams do. They are the ones that want to simplify things and keep everything easy for the younger players and kind of go about it that way. That's why the Miami Dolphins have a new offensive coordinator, and Chad O'Shea is not down there in Miami anymore, is because the players decided that it was too hard to learn the Patriots offense and they didn't want to put in the work necessary. I think that tells you why the Miami Dolphins haven't won anything since 1972. So if I were the Patriots, I wouldn't change a thing about their offense. Now, last year they did simplify it quite a bit just based off of the formations that they were using and the route combinations that they were running out of those formations. Usually we're used to the Patriots coming out like hockey lines, changing formations every single snap. And sometimes they're 3 wide receivers, sometimes they're 2, sometimes they're 4, they're spreading defenses out. This last year, it was a lot more 11 or just with the fullback in the backfield. And it was pretty rudimentary by their standards. So I can't imagine that they would simplify it any more than they already have.
Well, drop your questions in the live chat now. We're just going to take a couple more here. This one's around the new kicker, Justin Rohrwasser. Obviously, big shoes to fill with Stephen Gostkowski gone. And there's been obviously a little bit of controversy around him right from the get-go with the controversial tattoo situation. So he has a lot to prove, not just on the field this upcoming season. But why do you think he could be a good fit for the Patriots?
He's got a big leg. I mean, he's 6'3", 230 pounds as a kicker. So he's like a Sebastian Janikowski size type kicker. This isn't a little guy. So he's got a huge leg. He's got the clutch gene. There's some fact checking about that stat that he was 14 for 14 in the fourth quarter in overtime. Not exactly accurate, but close enough. So he's got a pretty good clutch gene to him. He's got some moxie. You can tell that things kind of roll off of him quickly, and he doesn't really let things get to him, which is very important for a kicker. So I like Rohrwasser's ability. I think he's going to be a solid kicker for them. I'll never forget watching Jake Bailey for the very first time in minicamp last year and watching his punts basically touch the clouds, and us all thinking, oh my God, this guy's like a punting savant. I don't know if we're going to go that far with Rohrwasser. I don't know if he's as skilled at his job as Jake Bailey is at punting the football, but he's a very good kicker for what they wanted, which is a guy that's kicked in the elements, that has a decent leg, that can be trusted in clutch situations.
I remember Jake Bailey wowed you so much on our hot takes of the season.
It was incredible.
You named him an All-Pro in the beginning of the season. That was your hot take for the year. So you love Jake Bailey. We'll see if Justin Rohrwasser.
It was incredible. It was like the guy was booming 60-yard kicks that were touching the clouds, and we're all just sitting there with our stopwatches like, oh my God, this is unreal.
That's how we spent most of our preseason, was just timing.
Ryan Allen didn't even show up. He was like, I get it. I'm done. I'm out.
I'll let myself out here.
Yeah.
We got another question here to wrap before we wrap things up. Is N'Keal Harry the Patriots' best receiver in an ideal world, perfect season?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, listen, it's going to be hard for him to be the better receiver than Julian Edelman. I mean, it's going to be
Right.
difficult for him to pass Edelman this year. But in an ideal world, N'Keal Harry is the first round pick that they expected that they were getting. They really need him to be that, and they're counting on him to be that. So I think the interesting thing with N'Keal is really figuring out, he's got a lot to work on himself with his route releases and at the top of the route and sort of his technique overall that he is working on this offseason. I think the biggest thing for the Patriots and the coaching staff is figuring out the best way to use his skill set, because he is a little bit of a unique player. It's really his best skills are after the catcher with the ball in his hands and then on jump balls down the field, which aren't exactly high percentage, big time production type of plays. So the Patriots need to get creative with his usage, I think, this year, move him around a little bit more, maybe play him more at Z, a little bit more off the line so he can move inside and out freely. So I'm really interested to see how Josh McDaniels, now with another year in the playbook, gets N'Keal Harry involved.
Our final question here, because I like it. Who gets the ball this season on 4th and 1 for the Patriots?
That's a good question. It was an issue for them last year at times. They were about middle of the pack in terms of success rate on power runs. So 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, goal line, those kind of scenarios. Actually, they were worse at it, believe it or not, in 2018 than they were in 2019. And I would say the guy that gets the ball is still Sony. I would give him the football. The Patriots sometimes like to go with Rex Burkhead in that role as well. So it's between those two guys. But I really do think that Sony, his biggest issue sometimes with short yardage is he doesn't get north and south. He doesn't get vertical quick enough. And he sometimes likes to go horizontally across the line to kind of pick and prod a gap before he gets up the field. And he doesn't have that same urgency. He needs to just go downhill throttle. And I think that he'll be perfectly fine in short yardage.
Well, if we didn't get to your question this time, don't worry. We will be going live on this YouTube channel every Tuesday and Friday at 1 o'clock Eastern time. Be sure to subscribe to our new YouTube channel right here at